Can you recall the last time you heard someone look at a piece of art and say something along the lines of, "My kid could do that"?
Oh my
Uh,
god.
um, I can't recall the last time, but something along those lines was definitely said around the spring of 2013 when I saw Brackage's films for the first time in class, for sure. Particularly his painting on celluloid stuff. That was definitely the sentiment amongst a lot of your kind of intro to the history and theory of cinema crowd. Was a kind of my kid could do that sort of a vibe.
Yeah, I mean, walking around museums, like especially in New York, like if you go to the Whitney or something like that, you definitely hear snippets of conversation from people where they look at a painting and they're like, why is this on the wall? Like, why do they have this? Why is this important? And you know, depending on what mood I'd be in the day, it's either like an angering experience or it's kind of amusing and funny. You know what I mean? But yeah, I try not to spend too much time on that because then the rumination cycle flows. So, you know.
All right. I ask this because we are talking about an artist that is not Split Picks general terrain. So I'm being joined today by two familiar voices. We have Robert Delany, who's the co-host of the Art House Drive-In. Rob, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
I am good. Portland is no longer icy, so we we have internet again. It's good. And we have Bennett Glace, who's the co-host of Real Rap and a longtime Split Tooth contributor. Bennett, how are you doing?
Not too bad. Philly attitude is still going strong. Living large and in charge over here.
Excellent.
Sorry.
All right, so this show definitely started as a podcast that was geared mostly towards rock and punk rock music especially. Today we're going in a completely different direction, though we are covering an artist who flaunts the rules of established film practices in a way that I think most punks would probably not be able to emulate. So we're talking about a legendary filmmaker today who has done pretty much everything you can imagine in film, from seconds-long animated works to a 4-hour film. He's painted on films, he's filmed what goes on in morgues, he's attached moths to film strips, and in the process, he has aimed to redefine what it means to see, understand, and interpret basically how images meet our eyes. This is Stan Brakhage we're talking about today, and both of you guys selected one of his films to cover. So, Rob, do you want to at least introduce the film and just why you chose that one?
Sure. So I chose Delicacies of Molten Horror Synapse, which is a bit of a mouthful. It was made in 1990, and it sort of represents to me the modified film strip side of Brakhage, or the painted on film strip side of Brakhage, because it's mostly abstract, I guess, animation, you could say. And it sort of embodies a big part of his career with other films like Mothlight, where he modified the film strip, or Dante Quartet, where he painted on it, or Stellar, Nike Music. You can go on and on and on. And so that's a big part of sort of who he was as an artist, like in technical terms, I guess.
Perfect. Bennett, what was your selection?
And I picked a film from a little later in Brackage's career, from '96, though I've seen '97 listed. Commingled Containers. I picked it. It was a film I saw in class when I was first introduced to his work, and I don't know. It's my most logged film on Letterboxd. I think I'm up to 27 views now, which is quite a lot. I watch it in like any context. If I'm in a good mood, I throw on Commingled Containers. If I'm in a bad mood, I throw on Commingled Containers. If I'm trying to fall asleep, if I woke up too early and need to kill time before work, I throw on Commingled Containers. I don't know, it never fails to thrill and inspire.
All right, so I think before we dive into each of these films, this guy has had a very long career that, like I said, he's done a bit of everything. So let's start with the basics. Where and when did you first watch a Stan Brakhage film, and if you remember, which one was it?
I first watched Mothlight, actually, interestingly enough. I used to talk about this a lot on Real Rap. My earliest like cinephilia was on the IMDb message boards, and one time on the Oscar Buzz forum, we were doing this thing. This would have been 2010, because it was a World Cup year. We were doing this like Directors World Cup. So people like picked a director and like picked films, and people would vote on them. It never went past the first round. I think it just kind of like died on the vine. But whoever picked Brakhage had picked like Mothlight as their round one selection. So I downloaded Mothlight on like Demonoid as like a 16-year-old. And that was honestly, I think, probably the first avant-garde, a term that Brakhage himself abhorred, first avant-garde film that I saw. And then I ended up being kind of introduced to him more formally in a classroom setting at Hamilton College a few years later.
So what was your initial reaction to it? Because that is famously the film where I'm not sure if he taped it or what he did to get the pieces of mods on the film strip, but that's one of his more famous works.
At the time, I think I was probably of two minds about it. I think I was probably a little bit, my kid could paint that about it. I think I probably had a little bit of like, oh, wow. I try to be a little bit more positive. I think I probably thought, I wish I'd thought of it, was more where I went there. I believe Mothlight was constructed. He took like two pieces of tape and put like moth wings and detritus between them and kind of used those two pieces of tape the way you would a film strip. And then, but I was also a little surprised to see that this was on like the 1,000 best films of all time list. I'll admit, it wasn't until kind of, I don't know, being introduced to him in an academic setting that I really started to think more deeply about it. Had the Directors World Cup continued, I might have had more opportunity to kind of wrestle with Brakhage's work as a 16-year-old. But at the time, I think I was a little perplexed.
Yeah, that was the first one I saw as well, and I kind of had the same reaction. Like, I know this is brilliant, but I don't comprehend it, Rob, what about you? What was your first Brakhage film?
So I think luckily for me, it was deeper into my sort of film studies career, in quotations, I guess. And I'd already found people like Norman McLaren, or who had sort of, I fell in love with his work, and Begone Dull Care, and like sort of that side of abstract animation. And I think I like stumbled upon Mothlight online and watched it, and like immediately was like, oh, this is immediately one of my favorite films that I've ever seen, which I do not think I would have had that reaction if I saw it in like high school, or I saw it early on at BU or something, in undergrad or something like that. And then I sort of revisited it later at NYU because they showed it in an avant-garde film class, and they showed it in the film theory class. They were just showing it all over the place there. And I remember a lot of the people being really sort of taken aback. There was no one that was like, oh, this is BS or something, but I think there were not a lot of hands shooting up to speak about it, I guess, in the class participation portion of the day. But I think, it's a film that I definitely appreciated more with like spending more time with it, I guess I could say.
See, it's interesting you mentioned that no one really had anything to say about it, because like I was talking with my brother Brett, who's obviously the film editor for Split Tooth, and he was saying the first college class he took where they showed Mothlight, he said it ended and no one really raised their hand at all, and the teacher just kind of said, well, it's better if you watch on a projector, like with the film running, so you can hear the mods and stuff. And he said that just kind of like killed the conversation. I had the same teacher a few years later. We did not watch that film, so I think he might have scratched it from the curriculum. But Bennett, you took classes with Scott McDonald, who's a well-known film scholar in college. And what was it like learning about Brakhage's work from someone who has a well-known reputation in the field?
Yeah, it was incredible, and I think one of my favorite pieces of writing about film at all in any context is upon Brakhage's passing in 2003. Scott published kind of a excerpted version of the interview he'd conducted with Brakhage back in his collection of interviews, A Critical Cinema 4. And in his introduction, he talks about his like uncertainty as like a scholar, like trying to come to terms with like both the breadth and the importance of Brakhage's work. And I don't know, I found that really charming reading that, and knowing that your professor, like you, had this sort of I don't know, like feeling of self-doubt when faced with like the immensity of this body of work. And I don't know, as a teacher, he tended to make the stuff really come alive. And I don't know, you mentioned a professor talking about how it's so different to watch projected. And I even wrote that in my notes. The real elephant in the room with like talking about these films is that, I don't know, in watching them on our phones and computers, we are losing both the immensity of the projected image and also that fragility of the projection, the sort of shaking, the sound of kind of moth's wings when you hear it kind of passing through the projection. It's an incredible experience, and I think Scott communicated really well that Brakhage captured better than just about anybody the I don't know, devotional and spiritual qualities of not just artistic production and consumption, but of cinema in particular.
So to keep it in the academic realm, like I took a history of jazz class in college, and the first probably 2 weeks of this class were literally called How to Listen to Jazz. I think it's important to quickly address, it's an ultra basic but forever complex question. How do you watch a Stan Brakhage film?
Rob, if you don't mind, I think Brakhage answered this question himself pretty well.
Go for it.
In his book Metaphors on Vision. So I'll just quote directly from the man himself. Imagine an eye unruled by man-made laws of perspective, an eye unprejudiced by compositional logic, an eye which does not respond to the name of everything, but which must know each object encountered in life through an inventor of perception. How many colors are there in a field of grass to the crawling baby unaware of green? How many rainbows can light create for the untutored eye? How aware of variations in heat waves can that eye be? Imagine a world alive with incomprehensible objects and shimmering with an endless variety of movement and innumerable gradations of color. Imagine a world before the beginning was the word. I think we were born knowing how to watch a Brakhage film, and the experience of learning how to watch television and learning how to watch Hollywood films teaches you how not to watch a Brakhage film. So really, I don't know, I think of watching a Brakhage film as just kind of shutting off your eyes and just sort of like letting them do what they're supposed to do. I don't know. That sounds both pretentious and anti-intellectual at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with those sentiments. I mean, reading his writing or his words is always so inspiring to me. Like sometimes I go back to the well when I'm feeling down and just read some like, quote from someone like Stan Brakhage or Robert Gardner or something like that. But I mean, I think going into Delicacies especially, I think when I first watched it this time, I was like, I'm going to try and know all of the ideas that are swimming around in this film, and I'm going to be concentrating super hard and, like a detective almost, but, sort of clearing your mind and opening yourself to just experiencing these things and trying to have the untrained eyes that Brakhage wanted to encourage in his viewers is such a, I don't know, it's such a more empowering experience and such a more impactful experience to me than being like, I'm going to go in this and then I'm going to write a 20-page paper. You know what I mean?
So this might be a weird question, but one thing I struggle with is I never know where to look on the screen in a Brakhage film. I mean, I kind of just settle with like looking at the center and trying to like absorb the whole thing, but like, do you guys find your eyes are drawn to anything in particular with his films, or do you just try to absorb it all?
I often try to unfocus my eyes watching his films so as not to feel that need.
I agree. I think I go in between sort of an unfocused like gaze, but also, I mean, the last time I watched Delicacies, I noticed like certain patterns that he was repeating, or patterns that were like interacting with each other. So sometimes I'd let my eyes like sort of be led along by the lines as well, and sort of trying to, almost swim along with the stimuli, I guess. Like that, I think that's, to me, when I watch these films, it's between just, letting them happen and then trying to like swim against the current or like with the current, if that makes sense.
Why don't we dive into Delicacies of Molten horror Synapse? This is one of his many painted on film works. I mean, Rob, can you tell me a bit about what that means and how he created this?
So it means that he's actually physically painting onto the film strip. So he's not painting on like a cell or something like that. He's actually modifying the piece of film. And, there are many people, he's not the only one who's done this. There are many people who have done it, like Norman McLaren and Len Lai, Steve Wallishen, Harry Smith. But Stan Brakhage is a very sort of famous filmmaker who does this. And for me, I'm very drawn to these films. Like, I mentioned Begone Del Care before, by Norman McLaren. I've seen that film probably, like 100 times or something like that. And it's just the boldness of molding the film directly sort of puts all experimentality sort of in perspective for me, where the artists are not just like sort of playing with the formal or ideological boundaries of film or cinema or whatever. They're molding the actual material, not just like a sculptor or something like that, because you're not molding it that much, but they're interacting with the material instead of trying to capture something and put it on there, if that makes sense. So to me, it's very inspiring, like the depths that these filmmakers go to try and express themselves.
So his films are, in a sense, a kind of a Rorschach test where, some people see nothing, some people see literally mind-expanding images unfolding. I admit I struggle with a lot of his work because there's so much going on. So do you want to just kind of walk us through what are the basic ideas of this film? And I know he's spoken about the ideology behind the film, but what's happening here?
Yeah, so I'm gonna read a paragraph that I found everywhere online, and I think Bennett and I have both sort of plumbs the depths of the internet to see if this was something he actually said. But it's on every single description, on every website that it has it. So I'm sure this is maybe something it looks like something he wrote, like the language of it. But so I'll read it now. The primary molten horror is TV. There are other horrors metaphored in the film. 4 superimposed rolls of hand-painted and bipack television negative imagery are edited so as to approximate the hypnagogic process whereby the optic nerves resist grotesque infusions of luminescent light. So there's a lot to unpack there that doesn't really describe the film all that well. But so I'll describe what happens in the film, I guess, in movements where it begins with abstract color and line, and it's sort of flowing on the screen in this sort of like tornado, and then TV bars will show up and sort of blotchy color will appear on screen, or it'll just be completely white, and then the abstraction will sort of bubble up within the TV bars, and it almost seems like the TV bars disappear and then the abstraction starts again. So it's kind of like those are the movements of the film. There's a lot of variation, of course. It's not that simple, but that's, to me, like sort of foundation of the film.
There's also occasionally this like tear kind of in the center,
yeah,
which reminds me, and at reading, I guess this is what it was supposed to suggest. It reminded me of when you're at the eye doctor and they shoot that kind of very, very sharp light into your eye. That experience of kind of like seeing the back of your eye is recreated in the film.
So yeah, I had to cheat with this film. This thing flies by. It's 8 minutes and 20 seconds of basically just, colors being thrown at you. I was watching the Blazers game the other night. They're playing the Lakers, and Damian Lillard went up for a layup. He crosses between two guys, goes up for a layup, takes contact, and it looks like, he just made a shot. But when you watch it in slow motion, he got hit on the left. So he has the ball on the right, but then he realized there's room on the left. So he switches hands in midair, throws the ball up after he gets spun around. Then he closed his eyes, and he threw it up blind. This made me think, if I watch this on YouTube, I can watch this at half speed. Mm-hmm. One advantage of technology, I know this would be better on a projector. Watching this at half speed, though, it clicked in my brain, and it just felt like walking through an art museum. Like, it totally changed how I watched it. But the thing that stood out to me most is how he uses just solid black frames. Mm-hmm. It kind of takes on a subliminal effect when it's super fast, but seeing how much of it there actually is, I mean, what do you make of this use of darkness?
So to me, it's all about rhythm, and it's the rhythm that's created almost like measures between the color and between the TV bars. Like, this is a great time to talk about how he thought of music in a very complex way where it wasn't even connected to sound. And I know that sounds crazy, and it's something that I'm just learning about, to be honest, and I'm sort of wrapping my brain around it. But he thought that his films created a type of music where it would be sort of created in your brain from just the stimuli in the film. So he wanted to make sort of visual music, or like he wanted to sort of embody a stream of consciousness. And to me, the black frames are like the rhythm of the film. Like if you want to, talk about like percussion or something in a song, like when I see those black frames, they sort of jump at me and they have this impact that break up, this simplifies his film, like the melody of the color and line, which I'm sure he would hate me saying that because he's thinking in the most abstract terms. But I know that he wanted his films to have this sort of ingrained rhythm in it, and those black leaders do that really well. And I do want to read this quote. We could just read Stan Brakhage quotes all day, so I won't I won't sort of drown us in Brakhage rhetoric. But this paragraph I really love, where it was to a letter to Rana Page, which I couldn't find anywhere, but I'd love to read the whole letter. He said, the more informed I became with the aesthetics of sound, the less I began to feel any need for an audio accompaniment to the visuals I was making. The more silently oriented my creative philosophies have become, the more inspired by music have my photographic aesthetics and my actual editing orders become. He says some other stuff. I won't read the whole thing, but those black leaders to me are very important to that philosophy,
So I sent you guys an interview that he basically did with himself yesterday. I don't know if you had a chance to watch it, but one thing that stuck out to me is he's just sitting in front of a camera and like he's talking about like I've never just stared at a camera before, and it's worth a watch. But he talks about how he thinks sound is a blind alley because when sound is associated with an image, he said it makes it more difficult to see, like talking in the grand concept. Do you feel that sound in his films would distract from the overall image?
100%. I think
Yeah.
his sound films are among the weaker of his films, the ones that I've seen. I'm now blanking on the specific names of any, but he has sound films, and to his point about them making it harder to see, when you have once you have a sound associated with an image, like it naturally becomes like Mickey Mouse. They can't help it. Like you can only associate it with a specific emotion, a specific action. I really do think film as an art lost a lot when it added sound. I'm very much a Luddite in that respect. I think dialogue is bad. I think musical accompaniment is bad.
Yeah. I mean, there's a manipulation to sound, right? And I mean, I never thought about this before, but in one of the articles you sent me, Bennett, there was an artist who is talking some major S about Oscar Fischinger, and I love Oscar Fischinger, but I understood what he was saying because Fischinger's films are so symmetrical, they're so ordered, and they're all synced so closely to the sound, or at least the one I'm thinking of is called An Optical Poem, which is a wonderful film, but it's very orderly, and you could see the manipulation in it where it's almost like a spell, sort of like enchanting the viewer, and sound is really powerful, and I think not having sound in these films opens the door for the visual music that he wants to create. I think it sort of would take away the whole endeavor,
I don't know. It's such a cliche to talk about like how it's more powerful or more scary or more like sexy or whatever to like have it be like something you create in a movie. But like I think Stan Brakhage the majority of his filmography is like an argument for that idea. Like the films are so much more powerful for being able to accompany them with whatever you want.
So now with his films, like unlike a lot of people, I think he probably has the most interesting things to say about his own work. Whereas, I watched an interview preparing for the last episode of Split Picks where Guillermo del Toro interviewed the Coen brothers. Most of the interesting stuff was coming from Guillermo del Toro, like probing them on their own films. But I feel like if you were to interview Brakhage, like he would be the one guiding the conversation about what's going on in his films, I think in almost 100% of the cases.
Yeah, I mean, his work and the intention behind them and the intense meaning behind them really calls into question the use of a term like experimental film. It was a term he really hated. He thought it did a disservice to filmmakers and scientists. Everything I've ever watched from him, as tossed off as this sort of stuff can seem to kind of a novice viewer, for lack of a better word, I think if you'd asked him about, Persian series number 6, he'd have told you why, specific strokes of paint look the way they did.
I think if someone wants to champion why sort of film analysis or film studies has sort of like a practical application in these films and sort of giving us, ideas and philosophy. Like Brakhage is the guy because it seems like he had this intention that sort of Bennett is talking about where he wants to give you, something. He's not just like giving you some entertainment or just an experience. There's also these like kernels of ideas, especially in Delicacies and Commingled, that he wants to sort of transfer to you. It was certainly tough with me, diving into his films before, but now the intention is, very, very clear when you watch it like 3 or 4 times, which I know is asking a lot from people to watch a film like 4 times, but he sort of demands that with, how much he cared about each of these works.
And part of that too is he talked about his films as kind of like being given to him to make. He talked about entering like a trance state that he would be in for like days at a time when he was making films. In one of the Brakhage on Brakhage interviews in the Blu-ray, he says he'd basically gotten to a point where he could tune out any sound that wasn't like one of his children in distress. Anything else that happened, he would, tune it out and be focused on the film. And I think for that reason, he's one of the few filmmakers where it's actually interesting to hear them talk about their own work, because like one gets the sense that he is kind of after the fact going, okay, so what was like the muse telling me, what was I getting at here? I don't know, I'm generally of a mind that like the least interesting person to hear talk about their own work is the director themselves, and he is like the exception to that rule, because I think his kind of like endless curiosity included exploration of his own work.
Yeah, I've been really interested in that trance state that some filmmakers talk about too. Like Robert Gardner talked a lot about that when he would sort of be submerged in an experience or a place, and he would just let the camera sort of guide him. Like he said that a lot in Forest of Bliss, where there are these weird shots where he has these pans over to like pieces of cloth or like specific people, and that trance state is something that I think about a lot with filmmakers of this mind, which I'm sure like people like maybe you could make a connection between like Gardner and Brakhage and how they looked at film in general.
I mean, going off him having the most to say about his own films, we haven't even touched on the idea that he also says this is about like the hypnagogic state of whatever that means. Rob, you seem to understand that portion better than I ever could, so do you want to take that?
So it came to me yesterday. I've been thinking about this so much, and I barely understood what that word even meant until like 12 hours ago. But I'll try and wrap my head around it because it's pretty confusing stuff. But so hypnagogic is relating to the state immediately before falling asleep. So it's sort of used in different contexts in this film. For one, it's about I think, to me, the relationship between abstraction and the way that people like Brakhage make films and television, or I guess you could just say mainstream media presentations of art or entertainment. So the feeling of going to sleep, and you're going between this state of waking and the state of dreams, is sort of like the relationship between the abstraction vying for space with the TV screen, and you're in this sort of gray area between these two minds or even like perspectives, and that creates this sort of mind-bending quality to the film. And also part of the hypnagogic paragraph, I guess the description he gives, is that one is sort of resisting the other, like the optical nerves are resisting the luminescent light. So I sort of take it that filmmakers like him are almost like resisting that other way to make film in some ways. Like the abstraction is sort of vying for space with the TV. It seems like with such a complex filmmaker, it's hard to make that like one-to-one comparison, but it's sort of unavoidable in this film, like how these two completely different ways of expression are, fighting for screen space. You know what I mean? And other than that, I think it's just an interesting experience, like human experience. Like I was saying, like, I've always had trouble with sleeping since I was a little child. And so like, I know a little lad. So I know that space between waking and sleeping very well. And I think he captures almost like the confusion, but also like the crazy fever dream-esque quality of that state of mind.
It's a state of mind that's easily associated with television too. I think you associate sort of channel surfing with sort of falling in and out of sleep. And You talk about the TV aesthetic sort of intruding upon his own. It's literalized in the film with this sort of, I don't know what to describe it other than like visual white noise, sort of overlaying the kind of painted on frames. That TV-ish quality, that sort of buzz, which, I don't know, he characterizes it as being horrible, and I generally think of TV as being horrible, but I do find that visual white noise so comforting. I don't know, like for me, that's like sitting in front of the hearth.
Yeah, I feel the same way. That's why I'm sort of divided about his views about TV in this film, because that white frame just makes me feel very warm and comfy inside.
It's home. It's home, baby.
It's awesome. But at the same time, then the abstraction starts bubbling up, and it looks like this crazy. It almost looks like a chandelier. Like there are these different forms of abstraction in this film, and one of them are these sort of, they look like almost shards of like luminous glass that are falling upwards, if that makes any sense. And that usually denotes like when the TV is going to disappear, when the TV screen is going to disappear. So there's almost like this conflict of aesthetics in the film, which is incredible as well. But I'm comforted by both things in different ways, I guess. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the film is him? Do you see it as like a despairing film, or do you see it as a somewhat triumphant one? Is he accepting that aesthetic begrudgingly, I guess, do you think?
To me, I've been thinking about this a lot, because I was going back and forth. To me, it's triumphant because the abstraction remains. Like if the TV screen appeared and the abstraction was just wiped away completely and didn't return, then I think it would be a very depressing view about where filmmakers like Brakhage, or not just filmmakers like Brakhage, where this like technique of film or this way of looking at cinema exists, is, it could just be sort of wiped off the face of the earth. But the fact that it keeps coming back and appearing and sort of thriving, to me, is like very hopeful, that like within the null space of the TV screen, something more complex can emerge,
Yeah, I like to think that he's, I don't know, if anything, if nothing else, TV has at least like invited a new way of seeing, and he's like, well, yeah, if you can't beat him, join him in that respect.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, like, thankfully he didn't live to see prestige TV.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. Thank God. Every time I turn on HBO, I go, thank God Stan Brakhage is dead.
So he has said, this is about TV, hypnagogic things. What's your emotional understanding of this film? Like, what do you take away from this?
So for me, watching abstract animation or a film like this is actually sometimes a more powerful experience, because it feels like pure emotion. So it's like, rather than, trying to empathize with characters or situations or events or climaxes, what have you, these films feel like they connect with me like on a chemical level. It's like very visceral, powerful experience, which is, I think, different than a lot of the rhetoric around these films. Sometimes people could say they're like cold or scientific or detached or pretentious and sort of divorced from everyday experience. Like, to me, this is like as close as you can get to the human experience as possible, because it's just pure, undivided, emotion.
Yeah, he's often compared to the abstract expressionists, and one way in which he said he was consciously aping the abstract expressionists was in the evocation of closed eye vision. I don't know, you watch a narrative film and like, I don't know, like I've never been a journalist, or I've never been married, or I've never lived in Chicago or something. Like there's all these different barriers to being able to relate to a narrative film. But like, I don't know, we've all closed our eyes and dazzled at the play of shape and color. So to characterize his films as alienating seems to really like miss the mark to me when people do that.
All right, well, I think that probably wraps up Delicacies of Molten Horror Synapse. Why don't we take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Commingled Containers.
Is that the one with the karate?
What?
I have completely forgotten what a Stephen King movie is.
Hi, I'm Sam Hain. Come on down to the Used Pumpkin Mart.
Synesthesia, a movie podcast, with Jason Mikulich and Jim Hickox.
It's time again.
From Split Tooth Media.
So, in 1996, Stan Brakhage makes his return to photography film after years of painting on film. Bennett, can you give us the story behind this project and what made him return to this medium?
So basically, in 1996, Stan Brakhage was diagnosed with bladder cancer, and a couple weeks before, he had kind of rented a camera on a whim, and walking away from the doctors, basically learning that he was going to have kind of exploratory surgery to see whether he would need his bladder removed, he plunged his camera into Boulder Creek, and the rest is history, as they say. Created, I don't know, for my money, the cinema's best evocation of infinity. I think it's in keeping with his whole mission that his film about death and dying would be rigorously unsentimental and yet, I don't know, really beautiful. Because, I don't know, his films about childhood are similar. His films about sex are similar. His films about, just day-to-day life are similar.
So you mentioned this is your most watched film, or most logged film on Letterboxd, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, 27.
27, okay. So what keeps bringing you back?
I think the colors are really pretty. I think the I think the shades of blue are really wonderful. I don't know. I think it manages in like 3 minutes to like if one were going to watch a single Brakhage film, this is the one I would recommend, because despite the fact that I believe it's all just photography, I don't think there's any like painted on celluloid in this. It manages to kind of evoke every aesthetic he ever used in his career. There's stuff that kind of looks like his scratched on films. There's stuff that looks like his painted on films. And yeah, I don't know. I think biographical readings of films are generally like so easy and so lazy. I tend to resist those. But like, I don't know, for a guy who obviously was such a interesting critic of his own work and who was mining such biographical material for his films, I think they're really useful. And it's hard not to be moved by a film knowing that like the guy thought it was going to be his last film and was sort of making this as like a, well, I'm staring into the void. I don't know. Something about that it's always appealing. The notion of staring into the void, whatever emotion you're feeling, is usually, I don't know, it's an itch worth scratching, to mix my metaphors horrifically.
I mean, and on that note too, if that's what the void looks like, I'm good with the void, because
Right.
the void is incredibly beautiful. I think that's why this film is so inspiring too.
Oh, that's another point. When people talk about like life on other planets, we always talk about like how narcissistic are we that we assume that like life on other planets would look anything like ours. And I really like that Brackage's evocation of the afterlife, or of whatever happens when you die, looks nothing like Earth. Like every cinematic evocation of heaven is like, dudes standing on clouds, people with like harps and wings and stuff, and it's like, well, what told us it would look like this? Like Renaissance art informed by, well, it would probably just look like a better version of today. I really like that Brakhage, I don't know, forces you to really think about like, well, what would it look like? What would it look like to just sort of, I don't know, live in this sort of sensory experience for eternity?
And one thing I really like about this one is it does start like, it's very clearly water at first, but then it kind of morphs into just like, is this water molecules? And then it kind of goes into this like, I'm not sure what I'm seeing anymore. What do you see as like the juxtaposition of like the very clearly defined versus a more abstract view of water?
Well, one of the things I really like is that within like a couple of seconds, we're sort of thrown off of our axis. That first shot of the sort of ripples of water, it starts moving like right to left, and then starts moving up to down, and then starts moving like in and out. We're not sure what axis to like orient ourselves on. And I guess what I like about it there is that I think it becomes kind of a... The title becomes a metaphor. Commingled Containers refers to a type of recycling where every type of material you might recycle is recycled in a single receptacle. And I like that the film, in its various evocations of water, manages to be a container for a bunch of different feelings that water might evoke. We're occasionally just drifting, and occasionally we're drowning, you know. Occasionally water is like filling up our lungs. And then occasionally there's those shots where it almost feels like you're in like a drip coffee machine or something. It's like a slow like water torture versus being drowned. There's so many different feelings evoked, again, in just 3 minutes. Folks, watch this film if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, this is definitely, in my opinion, the most emotional Brakhage that I've seen. I've only seen 12, which is to say very few, which is a weird thing to say for a guy that's made, like over 350 films or whatever. This is such a devastating film. Not just knowing the biography, but the emotions of the aesthetics is just incredible. So,
All right, so one thing Brett, my brother, brought up is that Brakhage mentions his influence from Gertrude Stein and how he looked at repetition differently after reading her work. Here's a quote from him saying, "Stein gave me the courage to let images recur in this fashion in such a manner that there is no sense of repetition." And so he's talking about how, when you just keep showing the same image over and over and over again, they all become their own thing. I mean, how do you feel about him just breaking patterns in that way and the motion and color that's created through these repeated actions?
I think Stein is a very interesting person to associate with Brakhage, and I think the repetition is an interesting theme. I think one thing from Stein that Brakhage captures really well is that there's the same thing can mean a lot of different things in different contexts, and I think one film of his that captures that really beautifully is The Wondering. I don't know if you watched that one in preparing.
Is that the train
That's the
station?
train one, yeah. And I think I think that gives you a good example of kind of the, I don't know, maybe I'm talking more like Wallace Stevens than Stein, but like it shows you the 13 ways of looking at like a train car, basically. There's like, one can look at it as a commuter, one can look at it as a child, one can look at it as someone who's longing for this human attachment, one can look at it as someone who's just like counting down the seconds till they can get off the freaking train. I think he much like Stein, in forcing you to kind of confront the same word or the same image. Yeah, I don't know, makes you very conscious of that.
I mean, for me, I like this quote a lot because I think this is a very dramatic thing to say, but I think repetition is sort of the gateway to enjoying much more complex films or cinema like Brakhage. Like when I think the first time I thought of that was like Bresson, like watching Lancelot of the Lake, and you see that jousting sequence, and it's just so repetitive where you see horse, knight, audience, flag, trumpet, but they're all slightly different and they all commingle. Not to use the pun, they all like combine into this like very different feelings, and I think that's the gateway to enjoying someone like Brakhage is realizing that like not every frame is exactly the same, or even if it is, it changes when it combines with each other.
So other than obvious time restrictions because he had cancer surgery the next day, why do you think he returned to photography after years of doing painted on film work?
I don't know, other than kind of a feeling of why not. It seemed like it was sort of a kind of a go for broke gesture from him, very literally, because it was financial constraints that had forced him to painting on celluloid. An interesting note that I actually forgot to mention in my notes was that the sort of bladder cancer he got was apparently caused by dyes he had used painting on films. The man was like very literally like killed by his vocation, which is I don't know, again, like one of those things that like however hacky is also sort of profound, right?
Definitely. I just learned that today, and it blew me away. That he even said it was like the alkalines that he used or whatever gave him the cancer, and like knowing that must have been insane for Brakhage.
What would you say are the major differences or even similarities between his photography work and his painted works, or is there a distinction?
I would say they're both they're similar in the sense that they're both about kind of unmooring us from what we've been led to believe is the one way we're supposed to consume film. I don't know. I've never really heard him talk about whether one. was about something else. I think they were probably both in keeping with the same mission. I don't know, Rob. Do you know anything about his particular philosophy of painting on film?
Not his specifically, but it's a tricky question because I think that's sort of, you see the same stylistic trademarks in both, but there's a definite difference in how he like treats space in Commingled Containers and Delicacies. At least to me, like, you know, those like scallop patterns that you have in Commingled, like those white scalloping patterns are something that I at least didn't see in like his more painted on work. There seems to be more of like, I don't know, it's so complex. It's so like hard to talk about how Brakhage uses like space because he does it in a jillion different ways, you know.
I guess another like thing he was achieving here, Craig, was kind of like bringing it full circle. I mean, here he's very much evoking his painted on films with photography. I think, as we sort of mentioned introducing the film.
Yeah, I mean that blue in the beginning, it looks like rain almost. Like there are these waves of blue, like you were talking about, as the camera moves, you know, up and down, side to side. That feels very much like the waves of color that you see in his painted stuff, you know.
So I think what made me think of it as a, you know, the different mediums is, Bennett, you mentioned a quote here where he talks about watching Jackson Pollock work in person and how he just saw it as like basically a trance state. But I just find it interesting to think of like painting on film, like, yeah, that could be seen as like a trance state where you have a blank slate. But when you have a camera in your hand, like, it's more capturing things you're seeing. So I don't know if that clarifies it at all, but I guess what do you think about the idea of the trance state in photographic work versus hand-painted work?
For all of his associations with the abstract expressionists, I mean, this seems like the most he was ever evoking that with camera in hand. This seems like the most sort of gestural filmmaking you can see from him. And I don't know, I mean, maybe it's just because there's nothing like there's no figures in the frame, but I don't know, it seems, yeah, again, like to use a horrible pun, it seems like a mingling of those two impulses here.
Completely agree. Yeah, I mean, especially with the color of the film, like the color design is so fluid. Not another pun. We're just going to say puns over and over again.
Get them out. Get them out.
Yeah, but you know, the color in Commingled is so fluid and like how it interacts with those sort of white, like slow explosions. They look like slow I don't know what they look like. They look like scallops. They look like things that, you know, that are just sort of growing in frame, almost like microbes or something. And the transition between those and these waves of blue are very painterly, at least to me.
So Bennett, you read it's basically the first paragraph in his book about how he approaches film, but you know, essentially what he's getting at is, if we eliminate definition, the idea of knowing what a word or an image means, experiencing just sight itself becomes its own thing. And that's why I think this one's so interesting, where he's facing down death and he is literally trying to make us reconsider how we view an element, you know?
Yeah, I think it's, first of all, I mean, it's like very moving that like up until like the last moment he was still that curious, that hungry for sort of a new experience, because I don't know, like it's easy to lose sight of in watching the film, but like Brakhage also had no idea what the film was going to turn out to look like too, you know? I hesitate to call someone like the greatest filmmaker of all time, but I feel like he's kind of like peerless when it comes to the sort of like enormity of his vision, and also like the furor with which he pursued his mission. I don't know. I can't imagine having a cancer diagnosis and then deciding like I need to go create. I don't know. I think like 99 people out of 100 would sort of like retreat within themselves, and I don't know. Stan Brakhage creates maybe the best film ever made.
So Rob, one thing, you recently interviewed Jody Mack. She's an experimental filmmaker. I really liked how she said to approach, like how she teaches her students to approach abstract film. Just look at it like it's a sunset rather than this is a film. I feel like Brakhage really does that, like, because you look at this and it's like, okay, this is water, but at the same time it's like it doesn't matter that it's water, you know?
Yeah, I was so glad she said that because I'm gonna use that forever now. She really gave me like a pearl to use for all time. And Jody Mack, for people who don't know, she's an abstract animator herself, and she makes these a lot of them silent as well. So I'm sure she would agree with a lot of the thoughts that Brakhage had. And it's interesting because when you're talking about liking this sort of film and you're introducing it to people, it's very difficult to get someone interested to watch this film if you're just like, it's a bunch of moth wings taped to a film strip. Maybe that's a little more dramatic, but talking about like, oh, it's just abstract line and color. It doesn't have the draw that Titanic does. But when she talks about, if you're watching Delicacies or Commingled, like you watch a sunset, it's very different than being like strapped into a roller coaster ride. You're sort of sitting there reveling in it as an experience. And it's very focused on like the experiential nature of art, which I think is very like nutritious, if you want to use kind of a loaded word like that. To me, that's something that sort of adds to you as like a person. Even that's like a dumb way to say it, but like the feeling that you get watching a beautiful sunset is like momentous, and that's how, to me, like films should feel, and that's how I think Brakhage felt that like film should feel as well.
Knowing that he approached this as his final film, I want to ask you about the ending, because it's mostly just this beautiful blue color. There's obviously changes throughout, but in the final seconds it turns yellow, kind of flashes, and then fades to white. Like, what do you make of this ending and what's going on here?
So if I can deign to criticize Brakhage for a second here, I think he puts a little bit too fine a point on the last couple frames of this film. To me, it was very reminiscent of the ending of Last Temptation of Christ, which I think is itself supposed to be kind of riffing on Brakhage and the like. You'll remember, of course, at the ending of Last Temptation of the Christ, when like the film sort of breaks from the camera, and we get just sort of like white light coming through with the film strip kind of going off to the side. This reminded me of that. It's sort of the camera coming to the surface in a couple of respects. It's not only coming out from under the water, but it's seemingly sort of ascending. And I don't know. For a filmmaker who never like told us how to feel or what to think, I think so obviously ending with like the ascension to heaven is like I said, puts a little too fine a point on it.
It's funny. I think I just learned today that I think somewhere online someone said, "Oh, Scorsese has like stills of Mothlight on his wall."
It says that on his Wikipedia page, and I couldn't find like the source. Yeah, where are they citing that from?
It is so interesting to think about a filmmaker like Scorsese being so inspired by someone like Brakhage, because their films are just could not be more different. You know what I mean? Like at the end of the day, they are on opposite ends of the spectrum. You know what I mean? Like people even thinking like Scorsese was inspired by like Cassavetes is like closer to what Scorsese is than, Brakhage or something. I would love to see like a Brakhage style Scorsese film. I wonder what he would do with like abstract animation or something instead of just making another mobster movie.
So given this ending, do you feel it kind of, I guess if you haven't been exposed to the story behind it, like, do you think that ending would be a similar idea? Like, oh yes, it's a happy ending. I mean, can you deduce that this is a happy ending or what?
I don't think we can call it a happy ending, because I don't think Brakhage himself would call it a happy ending. I think the whole point is that kind of unknowing, I think it's an uncertain ending, and I think whether or not you interpret it as a happy or a neutral ending kind of depends on your own spiritual leanings, I guess. It's like a Lady or the Tiger sort of ending.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that part of this film and his films in general. When people say that, oh, you can take different ideas from films or have a different experience when you watch a film, like these are the epitome of that. Because when I watch this film, it's sad because I know the biography, but it's also very hopeful in that the ether looks so incredibly beautiful. And even in the end, like having that ending, also gives me sort of hope in my agnostic brain.
Mm-hmm. That's another thing too, is I realize what a hypocrite I am in like championing Brackage's films. This guy who like really like believed that like God was like speaking through him in his films, basically, as like someone who has not a spiritual bone in his body. Like there's a certain part of me that sort of rolls my eyes at some of this, but like I don't know, it's a testament to Brackage's powers as an artist that like even I am moved by Commingled Containers.
Yeah, I'm in the same exact place. I agree.
Craig, have you seen Chinese series, his actual last film?
I don't believe so, no.
Oh, worth watching. It's also just a couple minutes long, and it's not as hopeful an ending as this. Like, I'm glad Commingled Containers exists because like it's a great grace note for his career. He even says in the interview with Scott, like, I almost wish it was my final film because it's so great. Chinese series, he was on his deathbed and was like wetting film strips with his saliva and like scratching into them. So you're watching it, and it's like you're watching like the EKG of like someone who's dying. It's really, I find it like upsetting.
It's so upsetting. It's like the embodiment of death throes, if that makes sense. It's just in the beginning, it's like, oh man, this looks like a ballet. Like, this is incredible. These like scratch marks, and then when it sort of picks up speed, you're like, oh no.
Oh, it's like, someone like hacking to death.
Oh no. Yeah. It's just like, oh God, what is happening? Like, so it starts off like, oh my God, it's so graceful, and then it becomes very disturbing, like aesthetically.
So as much as I find the ending of this like a little obvious, I'm glad it exists in his career to give us sort of like I don't know, like a perfect note to end on. If when we're programming a Brakhage class, you can't imagine a better note to end on than Commingled Containers.
So where did he go after this as a filmmaker?
So from my understanding, he did a little of everything. I think the only films of his that I've seen after this, I think, are the Persian series, which are painted on stuff, and then also the Chinese series, which is scratched on emulsion. But I think he also continued to do photograph stuff. He's got a film called Panels for the Walls of Heaven, which I'd really like to see. I know he did a painted-on film on like IMAX film strips. So he basically, by the end of his career, had worked on everything from Super 8 to IMAX, which is kind of incredible.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, looking at sort of the technical breadth of who Brakhage was, like who more apt or learned to like teach film courses.
All right, well, any final thoughts on Commingled Containers?
Folks, I think the film speaks for itself. To return to Rob's idea of a sunset, does one look at a sunset and go, damn, I wish it had ended differently. Fuck, I wish that purple was a little bit different. No, you don't. So you should watch Commingled Containers and think about it, the same way you think about a sunset or, I don't know, a kitten or something. Like something in nature that you don't judge for maybe it's a kind of stupid ending.
I wholeheartedly agree. You should just sort of sit back and let your mind wander as you enjoy one of the most, aesthetically beautiful, sorry, Stan, experimental films that, I think exists.
I would say though, to return to like the idea of what adjective we should use, since I do nothing but pass off Scott McDonald's ideas as my own, I'll steal another one here. He took to calling it critical cinema, and it's critical cinema both in the respect that it is of critical importance and critical in the sense that it criticizes traditional modes. So if you're ever looking for the right way to say avant-garde, maybe try calling it critical cinema. Thank you.
So we'll wrap this up. Split picks. We end it with picking which one you feel is the supreme picture. Bennett, you may have referenced that this might be the all-time greatest film ever made. So why don't we start with you? Because I think I have a feeling what the answer is.
I know I just spent a few minutes saying that I don't like how it ends, but hey, who likes how life ends anyway, right? Commingled Containers, it has to be. Even if I didn't know the sort of context for its existence, I don't know, you watch this movie, you throw this on, you're not having a bad time. I give this slight edge. They're both 5 stars for me on Letterboxd, which, as you know, is a rating I don't throw around lightly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to choose against Commingled, at least to me. I, like, personally, on my level, I just love painted on film strips so much that I would lean towards Delicacies, but I'm choosing Commingled because I think it's maybe the best Brakhage film I've seen, for sure. I think Mothlight has a really special place in my heart because it was the first one I saw, and it's one that I keep coming back to. But I think Commingled is sort of unmatched for just the thunderous impact it has. Maybe thunderous is not the word, but it feels thunderous on me.
The impact it has, like waves crashing against the rocks.
Yeah,
The cascading impact.
Yeah. But if it was me divorced from that, I would pick Delicacies. But Commingled for the win.
It's hard to argue against that one. I'd probably pick Commingled Containers as well. All right. Well, any final thoughts before we hit the old dusty trail?
Craig, I did have a question for you because you sort of implied up at the top that you were maybe a little bit more skeptical of Brakhage and his work. Anything more to say on that? Care to defend yourself? Care to defend your honor?
I really enjoy watching his stuff, but I do feel like I don't grasp it all. I mean, like Brett and I were talking yesterday, and I just said, like, a lot of his stuff reminds me of free jazz. I don't often just like listen to a free jazz song once and be like, yeah, I get it. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of stuff that I'll like listen to, kind of put away for 3 months, and then come back to it and be like, okay, that's really cool. And it kind of clicks late for me. So I'm not giving up on him. I respect the hell out of this man. So, I mean, just the way he writes is like, God, I wish I could have one thought that good someday. And then you read the next sentence and it's like, damn it, he did it again. So I'm working my way up to him.
I mean, at least to me, not understanding these films wholly is what makes them very interesting as well. That's another part. Like, I know we've just spent an hour analyzing the crap out of all of these films and trying to, get all of the ideas from them, but also not understanding is very exciting in film because, I don't know about you guys, but I grew up with films that you could understand and then just like walk away and go about your day and feel no differently because they were just sort of, pop experiences. And these are films, not to be cliche, that you can sort of grow with and live with for, the rest of your life.
So folks, if you're thinking, hey, I haven't done too much of that book learning. I don't get these art films. Have you ever closed your eyes and wondered at the dazzling shapes and colors? Then you can appreciate Stan Brakhage or I don't know, Len Lai or whomever.
This is the type of thing that no one but him could make.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where my brain goes to, like, I know it's great. I'm not there yet. So I'm working on it. I'm not quitting yet. So.
Hey, we're all on this journey together, Craig.
Excellent. Now we can pull up to the drive-in, am I right, Rob?
Yeah. Oh. Woo.
All right. Well, I think that probably wraps it up. Thank you guys so much for joining us. And obviously, we mentioned Art House Drive-In right there. New episodes every Monday. Bennett, what are you up to? Anything you want to plug or?
Follow me on Twitter at FilmPilled. Follow me on Letterboxd. Just my name, Bennett Glace. I recently got rid of all of my half-star ratings. I'm only using full stars now. Took a couple hours when I was supposed to be working on Friday morning to do that.
It's the season of giving.
Yeah. See which films got bumped up to 5 stars. See which got bumped down to 4. Yeah. Ooh. Anyway, sorry.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. This has been great. I forgot to say this at the beginning, so I'm Craig Wright, by the way. Yeah, we'll have more episodes coming soon, and you can find all things Split Tooth on our website, www.splittoothmedia.com.
Like in my head, he's like on the prow of a ship, you know what I mean? Like holding up a flag or, or something like that, or he's, going off into virgin territory or something. Like, it's very inspiring and sort of swashbuckling. Even I wonder if he thought of himself as like a swashbuckling artist, but in my head, that's what he's like, a cowboy or something like that.